The Marrek Murders is a feature film for Series 3 of Final Girl where you'll be fighting against the Tormentor in Marrek Warehouse. In this scenario, the Tormentor will not appear on the board until the finale is revealed. Instead, she will be placing victims and the Final Girl into death traps, and you can work to disarm these traps and free the occupants before the trap advances to the last level and kills them. Marrek Warehouse, on the other hand, starts the game with all the exits locked, and you won't be able to save victims until they unlock one by one with the click tarot cards throughout the game. In this video, I'll go over the special rules for Tormentor and Marrek Warehouse and clarify some commonly misplayed rules and cards. If you want a general overview of how to play Final Girl, then check out my rules video before you watch this one. Set up the location as normal and place one lock token on each of the 3 exits and the forklift token in the pit at the center of the board. Set aside the 3 click tarot cards. Create the tarot deck as normal with 10 cards and set 2 of them aside. Then shuffle the 3 click cards with the remaining tarot deck and finally place the 2 set aside cards back on top. In the end, you should have a tarot deck with 13 cards when facing most killers, and the top 2 won't be click cards. Add the climb and leap action cards to the action tableau. Next, we need to set up the killer by shuffling the victim traps and Final Girl traps and setting them aside for later. Draw a setup card and set up victims as normal, but Tormentor does not start on the board. Instead, place a victim in the killer's starting space and put them in a trap. Draw a card from the victim trap pile and place the victim on the starting space of the trap card. Then find the matching token and place it on the killer's starting space. Marrek Warehouse is an interesting location where all the exits start the game locked. You can still move into and through the exit spaces, and you can even bring victims with you, but you can't save victims at a locked exit space. Instead, you'll have to wait for the 3 click tarot cards to appear. Each click card will unlock one specific exit. When an exit is unlocked, discard the lock token and you can now save victims there. Click cards also instruct you to draw another tarot card, so even though the tarot deck starts with 13 cards, it'll still be 10 rounds until the deck runs out and the finale appears. Marrek Warehouse also has 4 rack spaces shown by this symbol and colored red. These represent the top of the warehouse's storage racks, and so the Final Girl cannot move into these spaces with normal movement. She'll have to use the new action cards Climb and Leap instead. Enemies and victims, however, can move to and from rack spaces as normal. Climb and Leap are special action cards that function like any other action card, except they do not cost time to purchase. Instead, you will acquire these cards by discarding Walk or Sprint during the action phase. Notice I said action phase, not planning phase. You purchase these cards on your turn during the action phase. If you discard a walk card during the action phase, then you can take either climb or leap into your hand. If you discard a sprint card during the action phase, then you can take both climb and leap into your hand. Once you acquire these cards, they are available to be used immediately if you want, and once played they go back to the action tableau at the end of the planning phase just like normal. This also means that you can buy them again during the next action phase, unlike other action cards that are purchased during the planning phase. Climb is how you move into rack spaces from an adjacent space and can only be played when the Final Girl is adjacent to a rack. On 2 successes, you move to the rack space and lose 1 time. On 1 success, you move to the rack space and lose 2 time. And on a fail, you lose 1 heart and return climb to your hand. Victims may follow you as normal when you climb onto a rack. Once in a rack space, climb cannot move you off of it. You have to use a normal movement card like walk or sprint. Leap is how you move from one rack space to another and can only be played when the Final Girl is already in a rack space. On 2 successes, you move directly to another rack space and lose 1 time. On 1 success, you move directly to another rack space and lose 2 time. And on a fail, you must move 1 space and lose 2 hearts. Because you are forced to move 1 space, failing a leap will move you off the rack space into an adjacent space. Notice that on a success, you get to move to any other rack space. So if the Final Girl is here and gets a success on leap, then she can move to any of the other 3 rack spaces, skipping over any non-rack spaces. Victims may follow you as normal when you leap, and even if you fail, they will safely follow you to the ground without taking damage. That's pretty much it for rack spaces, but remember that victims and enemies both treat rack spaces like any other space. So victims can panic on and off the racks, and the killer will use them when determining the shortest distance to their target if necessary. Also, some events and item cards may refer to rack spaces by using the rack symbol. There's one more special space in the center of the board called the pit. And when victims in the pit panic, you'll roll 2 dice instead of 1. This is because it's connected to 8 different adjacent spaces, so 1 die just isn't enough. This is also where the forklift is located at the start of the game, but you'll have to find the forklift keys item to actually use it. That's all the rules for Marrek Warehouse, so let's look at the Tormentor next. The Tormentor does not appear on the board until the finale is revealed, so ignore all killer actions on tarot cards. Instead, she'll be placing victims and the final girl into death traps. Whenever you see either of these symbols, you'll place a new death trap. There's 2 separate types, one for victims and one for the final girl. Let's look at victim death traps first. Whenever you see this symbol, you'll draw a new victim death trap from the deck and trap the indicated victim in it. As an example, this card tells us to trap a victim in the space with the most victims. We draw a new victim trap, find the matching token, and place it in the victim's space. Then we remove the victim and put it on the start space of the trap card. Once a victim is trapped, they can never be targeted by Tormentor unless indicated otherwise. Tormentor's default killer action before the finale is this symbol, which advances all death traps. This symbol will also appear on tarot cards. To advance a death trap, move the meeple to the next space on the trap card and suffer the effects on that space. On the swinging blades trap, the first time it advances, you'll gain a horror. The second time it advances, you'll lose 1 time, and so on. If the victim ever reaches the final space with this symbol, then they are immediately killed. Put the victim into the killed pile and raise Bloodlust as normal. You'll also suffer the fail result shown on the bottom of the trap, which in this case is to gain 1 horror. Leave the token on the board because during the next panic phase, all victims on a space with a completed death trap will panic, and the token will remind you of this. Then during the upkeep phase, remove the token from the board and discard the trap card. How do you save victims from death traps? Well, you'll have to complete all the escape tasks shown on the card in order. To complete an escape task, you must first be in the space with the trap. Then you can attempt the task in order from top to bottom. If the task requires you to spend time, then simply spend that amount of time as long as it doesn't put you below 0. If the task requires a certain amount of damage or for you to move a certain number of spaces, then you'll need to play a card or use an item. If you use an action card for it, then you're only using it to complete the task and you don't get to actually use the effect. Any excess movement or damage beyond what is required is also lost, and you can use multiple cards to complete a task as long as it's all in the same action phase. Other victims will help you complete tasks if they are also in the trap space with you by adding 1 extra die to any horror rolls used to complete an escape task. No matter how many victims are in your space, you can only get 1 extra die. Let's go over a few examples. This task requires 2 damage, so you could play a weak attack, furious strike, or critical blow to complete it. You can even use a weapon if you have one to increase the damage. If you play weak attack and only do 1 damage, then you can still play furious strike in the same action phase to do the other point of damage to complete the task. If the killer is in your space and you manage to do 3 points of damage, the excess 1 damage is lost and can't be used to damage the killer. Similarly, for movement requirements, if you get 3 moves from sprint and only need 2 to complete the task, the other point of movement is lost. If the next task also requires movement, you can't carry over any from the previous task. You'll have to play a new card to gain more movement. Notice that in all cases, you don't actually move, you're just using the movement to complete tasks. Finally, this card requires 2 damage and 2 movement to complete 1 task, and you'll have to do both during the same action phase to complete it. Once you've completed the topmost escape task, place a marker there to remind you. You have to do the tasks in order from top to bottom, but you can complete as many as you want during an action phase. When the last task is completed, then the victim is freed from the trap. Place the victim on the space with the trap and remove the death trap card and token from the game. Final girl death traps work in much the same way as victim death traps. When you see this symbol, you'll draw a new final girl death trap, find the matching token, and place it on your space. Then remove the final girl meeple from the board and place it on the starting space of the card. While trapped, you may not play reaction cards, search, or perform attacks on enemies. You also cannot be targeted by the Tormentor Tormentor unless noted otherwise. When this symbol appears on killer actions or tarot cards, you'll advance all traps, including the Final Girl trap, and suffer the consequences. And if you ever advance to the last space on the trap, the Final Girl is immediately killed and you don't reveal your final health token. To free yourself, you'll have to complete all the escape tasks from top to bottom, just like we previously talked about. Some Final Girl traps require you to lose health. You can choose to do this at any time during the action phase by simply removing that many hearts. If any victims are in the space with the Final Girl trap, then they will help you with escape tasks by adding 1 extra die to your horror rolls. No matter how many victims are in your space, you can only get 1 extra die. Once you complete the final escape task, then you reappear on the board and discard the Final Girl trap card and token. There's a new symbol on some tarot cards that looks like this. When you see this symbol, then you bottom the tarot card by placing it on the bottom of the tarot deck. For instance, this tarot card normally advances all traps, but if no victims are trapped, then you bottom this tarot card and draw a new one. Since the Tormentor isn't on the board, you'll be ignoring all killer actions on tarot cards, and any effects that tell you to place the killer somewhere are also ignored. If a tarot card has you placing something or counting spaces from the killer's location, then draw a new setup card and consider the killer's starting space on that card to be the killer's current location. Once the tarot deck is empty and you reveal the finale, Tormentor will appear on the board at the start of the next killer phase. So after the finale is revealed, you'll have 1 more action phase with her off the board before she appears. Then at the start of the next killer phase, you'll draw a new setup card and place her on the killer's starting space. Then you'll carry out the killer action on the finale card. With any luck, you'll be able to avoid her attacks and kill her off. So that's all the special rules for Tormentor and Marrek Warehouse. Now I'll go over some commonly misplayed rules and cards. First, I'll point out that on the Tormentor's Bloodlust track and at the very top, she has you discarding a random action card. Not a tarot card, it's an action card from your hand. It's easy to miss since most of the other killers discard tarot cards at the top of their track. Next, the top exit space called Main Entrance is missing the exit symbol. It's still outlined in green and has a space for the lock token, but it's missing the actual door symbol. It is in fact an exit, and that's just a misprint on the board. Another thing that's easy to miss with this exit is that it's not connected to the space below it, only to the spaces on the left and right. Next, I'll reiterate that victims and enemies can move to and from rack spaces as if they're a normal space, and even when victims panic off a rack, they don't take damage. There is an event that changes this, but normally rack spaces are just normal spaces for everyone but the Final Girl. Now we have the You Aren't Going Anywhere event card, which relocks all the exits and shuffles the click cards back into the tarot deck. If you happen to draw this event from a click tarot card itself, then you still lock all 3 exits and shuffle all 3 click cards back into the tarot deck. Then you draw another tarot card. Similarly, the Smarter Than They Look event lets victims save themselves when an exit unlocks. However, if you draw this event from a click card, then the exit that was just unlocked is not eligible for victims to save themselves because it unlocked before the event was drawn. The event must already be in play before the click card is drawn. Finally, let's go over a couple of finale and dark power cards. First is the No Escape finale. This is a unique finale where Tormentor ignores you and all victims and instead tries to lock all exits one by one. It says at the start of the killer phase, if all exit spaces are locked, you lose the game. So you don't immediately lose the game after the final exit is locked. You instead have 1 more action phase to kill her, and then at the start of the next killer phase, you will lose. Finally, let's look at the Endless Trap's Epic Dark Power. It says each time a victim is freed from a death trap, resolve a new victim death trap on the furthest victim. You lose if there are no victim death traps to resolve. This makes it very important to remember that death traps are removed from the game after they are resolved, either from you saving the victim or when the trap completes and the victim is killed. With this card in play, if you ever need to put out another victim death trap and there are none available, then you immediately lose. However, Endless Trap specifically says that you trigger another trap only when a victim is freed from a death trap. If instead a victim dies from a death trap, then that's it. You remove it from the game as normal and you don't trigger another trap. Alright, and that's how you play the Marrek Murders. Let me know in the comments what you think of this feature film and how you'd rate it compared to the others in Series 3. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to me on YouTube. If you want to check out more of my videos, then click the links on the screen, and maybe you'll find a new game to play. And with that, Michael Skeleton is out.